Welcome to the Animal Science 1101 Introductory Animal Science. This video is Reproduction 1, Female Reproduction. We are going to start with the female organs of reproduction. And kind of the number one place to start is with the ovaries. The ovaries produce eggs, and eggs mature as the female ages or gets older and starts to ovulate at time of puberty. Interesting things about the ovum: you have the maximum number of immature ovum in the ovary at birth or when the young bird is hatched. Either way. What we have here is a picture of bovine ovaries. And ovaries are fairly dynamic. There's a lot of things going on. So here we have somewhat of a mature follicle, but you can generally find a whole bunch of immature follicles on the surface of the ovaries as well. And on this spot here, it appears that we have a aging corpus luteum. The ovaries produce a significant amount of hormones which have very important functions. So usually the female hormone that we talk most about is estrogen. It causes estrous behavior. Estrus is when the females are receptive to the male. So we've got an ovary here, and here we have a mature follicle, and so when that follicle is mature, that's when we get the highest production of estrogen. In that time of ovulation, then we'll get a solid mass formed here, also known as the corpus luteum or yellow body, also known as the CL. And here's kind of external picture. If we'd cut this open, would find that that cell mass that's producing the progesterone is actually yellow in color. That's why it's known as a yellow body. Progesterone needs to be maintained relatively high to maintain a pregnancy. Now the ovaries also produce a small amount of testosterone that is necessary for a healthy animal, but it's a relatively low amount, about 5% of what you'd find in a male. I'm not sure if these are the best diagrams, but so here we have, I wish it was colored yellow instead of red, but this is a CL, so we have the external part, but it's kind of like an iceberg, most where it's below the surface. Here we have follicles that are kind of developing and migrating towards the surface. Here's a mature follicle, appears like a blister. And at ovulation, this will break open and the ovum comes out. Okay, we'll leave the ovary now and go on to the oviduct. Beginning of the oviduct is the infundibulum. So here we have the ovary. The infundibulum is loose area of skin that or tissue that kind of covers the ovary and will collect that egg at time of ovulation. The connects the ovary area here to the uterus. In most animal species, it's about 4 to 5 inches in length. Of course, as animals get smaller, as in mice, that length is going to decrease. Fertilization actually takes place in the oviduct. So we get this egg that comes here, and then it will stop about a third of the way down, and hopefully we've got sperm coming up to meet that egg, or maybe even sperm waiting for the egg at the site of fertilization. The eggs remain viable in the oviduct for 2 to 3 days. The eggs must be fertilized within 10 hours of ovulation. So we had ovulation, fertilization takes place, the egg will slowly make its way down, and into the uterus at about day 2 or 3. The uterus has a couple of different functions. Definitely provides the environment for the developing embryo and the fetus. It secretes nutrients until placentation takes place, and after the placenta becomes functional, provides a place for the exchange of nutrients between the mother and the placenta. The uterus also helps regulate the estrous cycle by producing the hormone prostaglandin. If the animal is not pregnant during the estrous cycle, prostaglandin is released from the uterus, which causes regression of the CL on the ovary. The reproductive tracts of our mammalian species are all relatively similar. Maybe a big difference between the length of the uterine horn. So here we have a equine, and here's the body of the uterus. Here's the uterine horns. Whereas in cattle, the body of the uterus is only 1/2 to an inch long, and then we have these bigger uterine horns in which the calf may develop. Litter-bearing species are going to have these longer uterine horns, and body of the uterus very small. So here are the uterine horns of a pig, and at time of pregnancy, the developing fetuses are going to be spread out evenly throughout these uterine horns. Just a rough schematic drawing of showing the differences in the length of the uterine horns between the different species. So here again we have a litter-bearing animal, we have our ruminants, and of course sheep routinely have twins and triplets. And then we have equine, where you just get single births. Twins are extremely rare. And then we have humans, where basically the body of the uterus is pretty much the whole uterus. The cervix is comprised of connective tissue. It kind of serves as the gateway between the vagina and the uterus. It secretes a cervical plug when, especially during pregnancy, to help keep pathogens out of the uterus and provide a sanitary environment for the developing fetus. In our ruminant animals, there are what we call rings in the cervix. So here we have a cervix that's cut open along its length, and you'll kind of see where these rings are in here, and can make insemination just a little bit difficult because you need to thread the pipette through those rings. Whereas in other species, generally once you hit the cervix, it's just a nice straight shot through. The vagina serves several functions. It's the area from the vulva, the external genitalia, up to the cervix. And during natural service, it's where semen is deposited, except in pigs, where the semen is actually deposited right into the cervix. The vagina also serves as a birth canal. Interestingly, the vagina secretes a relatively acidic mucus, and the purpose of this acidic mucus is to kill bacteria. So we just keep a more hygienic area there. Now, during estrus, when animals are receptive to the male, the mucus changes into a clear crystalline mucus, less acidic, so that it's not going to kill the sperm. And finally, the vagina also, besides serving the reproductive tract, also serves the urinary tract. The vulva is the external part of the genitalia. It's the outer lips of the reproductive tract. During estrus, the blood supply to the whole reproductive system increases, and as part of that increased blood supply, we get a swelling of the vulva during estrus. It's very pronounced in swine. One way to detect estrus in pigs is to look at the swelling to the vulva. Interesting thing in horses with if a mare's in estrus and she's excited by a stallion nearby, the vulva will wink open and close, indicating that yes, she is in estrus. The broad ligament holds the reproductive tract in place. So here we have the reproductive tract, and obviously if the animal becomes pregnant, we're going to have a big calf here. So this broad ligament stretches to keep the uterus somewhat in place, but it allows it to grow. Well, birds have definitely some differences as far as the reproductive tract compared to mammals. We do have a little bit of the gross anatomy here. Here's the digestive tract in a hen. Here's the reproductive tract with the ovaries and then the rest of the reproductive tract here. But just pause for a minute and think of the differences between reproduction in avian species compared to mammalian species. Can you think of two or three? Well, there are actually a lot of differences in the reproduction between hens and mammalians, so I just listed a few here. Birds will lay a hard-shelled egg. Both mammals and avian ovulate eggs off the ovary, but it's definitely different with chickens. Birds only have one functional ovary. If we look at the gametic sex, males are XY for mammals, ZZ for chickens, while the female is ZW. Birds don't have an estrus cycle. Most birds are seasonal breeders, but when they come into season, they readily let the male inseminate them. There's no cervix, although there is gateways between one part of the reproductive tract and the other. First, the embryo develops outside the body. The egg is laid and then incubated, and all the nutrients required by that young embryo is contained right in the egg. Birds do not have mammary glands, so birds do not produce milk. Obviously, birds do not secrete lactase to digest lactose, so no reason to feed milk to birds, obviously. And the viability of the semen in the reproductive tract in mammals, generally, and there are differences between species, but cattle and common farm animals, the semen usually remains viable in the reproductive tract for about 24 hours or 1 day, whereas in chickens, the semen remains viable for 10 days. For turkeys, it remains viable for 30 days. So just a little more details on the egg laying process here. So we have the ovary. Looks kind of strange. It looks like a cluster of grapes here. There are 3,000 to 4,000 immature ovum contained in here. Maximum number of ovum when that chick is young, so you don't produce more ovum over time. And then we get the yolk that's produced. So this yolk here is ready to be ovulated. This one here will probably go the next day, etc. So we can kind of see the order here. Now the germ cell is located on the yolk, and that will be what needs to be fertilized at time of ovulation. And then we have the infundibulum. So the infundibulum will capture this yolk at time of ovulation. Fertilization occurs in the infundibulum. the egg only remains in the infundibulum for about 15 minutes. And then the egg the yolk comes down to the magnum. The magnum secretes most of the albumin around the egg, remains there for about 3 hours as it travels through here. And then it gets to the isthmus. At the isthmus, the shell membrane, just the slight membrane there, is put around the egg. Takes about 1.5 hours. And most of the work is done in the uterus here where the shell is formed. So calcium carbonate is put around the egg. Pigmentation is added at the end if they are pigmented eggs. And the egg is complete, goes down the vagina, out the coacula, and out the vent. And if you've got a hen that's going to lay an egg a day, 30 minutes after the egg is laid, another yolk is ovulated. Most eggs are laid and they're perfect. They're egg-shaped, and if they're fertilized, we're going to get a chick, but not all eggs are perfect. And as we're seeing this egg-laying process, there's places where mishaps can occur. So can you think of cases where you've broken open an egg and it wasn't perfect? Blood spots are relatively common, and you can find them occasionally, just a spot on the yolk. Sometimes you may have a little more blood. And as far as the ovulation process, it's relatively dynamic. There's a lot of blood supply to that develop that yolk. At time of ovulation, the blood vessels have to be closed down, and it's very possible you could get a drop of blood that follows that yolk down. So blood spots, that's caused right at the time of ovulation. As far as the quality of that egg with that blood spot, both chemically and nutritionally, these eggs are fit to eat. That blood spot may not be all that appealing, so just take a tip of a knife and remove it if you wish, or make scrambled eggs. Now, most eggs with blood spots, they're going to be removed while they process these eggs and carton these eggs, but once in a while, one will slip through. I have definitely cracked open many eggs there where we had a double yolk. In that case, we just had 2 ovum or 2 yolks ovulated at the same time. In other somewhat abnormalities here, we can have a soft shell, and especially if the hen does not have enough calcium in the diet, or for some reason the egg just don't stay in the uterus long enough. A yolkless egg can occur once in a while. A yolk wasn't ovulated, but the reproductive tract thought that it needed to produce an egg. Green eggs actually refers to more or less green-colored yolk. If the birds are out on free range and eating a lot of grass, the yolks can appear almost green in color. You could have a small egg inside of an egg. In addition, you can have shells that are eggs that are not exactly egg-shaped. So that happens. Every egg is not perfect. And I guess that last slide for this little section on female reproduction.